The brick was warm in Ezekiel Carter's palm, though the night air in Christian County had turned cool. His calloused fingers pressed its coarse edges as he lowered it into the thin bed of mortar he had smoothed across the baseboard. The trowel rasped like a whisper against stone, a sound drowned almost instantly by laughter drifting from the dining room behind him. A cheer rose, followed by the ringing of silver against glass. The Whitfords and their guests were feasting, their voices buoyant, their bellies heavy, their eyes blind to the narrowing world around them. Ezekiel's arm moved with a steady rhythm. Brick, mortar, brick. He slid the blade of iron across the soft lime, folded it back upon itself, pressed another stone tight until it sang with pressure. Each motion carried the same deliberation as a heartbeat. He had done this work since he was 12, building smokehouses, chimneys, the very dining hall in which the family now sat. His masters praised his craft but never called his name except to command it. Tonight his skill bent not toward creation but toward sealing a tomb. Sweat slid down his temple, though the autumn air was a bit cold. It stung where the lash had broken him years before, white scars roping his back beneath his coarse shirt. He tasted the salt as it dripped near his lip, and with it came memory. The overseer Silas Whitford's voice cracking like the whip itself, demanding he hurry his labor, demanding he build faster even as his father lay gasping from a fever in the slave quarters.
Ezekiel had not been permitted to sit at his father's side as he died.
He had been ordered to finish the barn roof before sundown. Now he worked at another roof, though inverted, closing the heavens off from those who had stolen his own. From the crack in the doorway came the soft glow of tallow candles. Their smoke carried the sweetness of roasted fowl, the tang of mulled wine, the heavy perfume of Prudence Whitford's sugared pies cooling on the sideboard. He could hear her laugh, shrill and sharp as glass, echoing above the men's talk of land, cotton, and markets. The sound dug at him like the lash. Temperance, his sister, had once laughed like that, bright, ringing until the day she was taken south, sold to pay Silas's debts. He had not heard her voice since. Only her scream remained with him, a sound that slipped into his dreams and hollowed them out like wrought in timber. The first course plates clattered. Silas's booming voice called for another toast. Guests roared approval. Yet in the corridor where Ezekiel knelt, silence grew heavier than their merriment. The first wall began to rise, brick upon brick, the line creeping across the window frame like a shadow overtaking light. The mortar smell thickened, sharp, acrid, laced with lime that burned the back of his throat. He swallowed it like medicine, steadying himself. The scrape of his trowel was louder to him than their voices. It was a ritual. The blade scooped, the mortar spread, the brick pressed. The rhythm steadied his breath, dulled the ache in his spine, beat against the drum of memory until he heard only the sound of stone. Yet even beneath that rhythm, something else stirred. A chill draft coiled along the corridor despite the hearth blazing within the dining hall. Ezekiel shivered, then stilled. Not from cold, but from the sudden weight of silence threading itself through the laughter. A guest paused mid-sentence, cleared his throat, muttered about a draft. Another adjusted her shawl. The fire leapt high, then faltered, though the wood was fresh-fed. Still they carried on. Still they did not see. Ezekiel's heart pounded against his ribs like another hammer, but his face was carved in calm. He spread more mortar, thick as clay, and remembered his father's voice. Caleb Carter had once told him in hushed tones as they mended a chimney together, "Stone remembers what flesh forgets, boy. You lay it right, it will hold when all else crumbles." Ezekiel had held those words longer than his father's hand. The voices inside the hall swelled again, drunk with wine. Silas bellowed at a servant to refill his glass. Prudence ordered a boy to fetch more pie. The laughter seemed to mock the silence of the corridor, to swell against it like a tide pushing against stone. But the stone did not move. Stone remembered. Ezekiel pressed another brick into place, the mortar oozing like pale blood at its edges. He wiped it smooth with the flat of the trowel. His breath came slow, steady, his eyes narrowed upon the line he was building. He did not look toward the door. He did not need to. He felt the glow of the candles upon his back, felt the warmth of the fire against the cool draft, felt the laughter clawing at the silence he carried in his chest. He laid another brick. Another. The wall rose higher. A servant girl, no older than 12, slipped past the doorway carrying a tray of silver. Her eyes flicked once to Ezekiel, wide, curious, but she said nothing. She had learned silence too. The door swung shut again, and the room beyond roared with talk of markets and cotton bales. of the river traffic, of fortunes made upon the backs of men like Ezekiel. Their words scraped his ears like gravel, but he worked on his trowel singing its own hymn, the hymn of mortar, the hymn of stone, the hymn of silent swallowing laughter. His back ached, but he ignored it. His knuckles cracked, but he pressed on. Each brick was a memory. Each brick was a lash. Each brick was Temperance's scream. The wall grew, and with it something inside Ezekiel stilled. Not peace, something colder. Something heavier, as though the stone itself were climbing into his chest and bricking away the ache of grief. Inside, a guest sneezed. Another coughed. "Chill in here tonight," someone muttered. Yet the fire burned, and Ezekiel knew why. The corridor air thickened with dust. The candles flickered, dimmed yet held. Ezekiel placed another brick, his hand steady, his breath long. The laughter from within rose again, but there was a tremor in it now, faint, barely audible. The fire hissed, a log collapsing inward. Shadows stretched across the room as if drawn toward the narrowing windows. Ezekiel did not look. He did not need to. He laid another brick. The first wall was nearly closed. The scrape of the trowel sang louder than the feast. The mortar's acrid scent drowned the perfume of pies. The silence pressed heavier than the guests' voices. Ezekiel's sweat ran into his scars and burned, but he did not stop. He did not flinch. He did not breathe except in rhythm with the stone. And somewhere, faint, beneath the laughter and the clatter of silver, a voice shivered across the room. A woman's voice. "Is it colder here?" she asked. No one answered. Ezekiel lifted another brick. If you're enjoying this descent into darkness, subscribe to keep exploring history's most chilling untold stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have done the same in his position? The laughter carried on, rich and coarse, swelling against the walls Ezekiel raised in silence. Each voice inside the dining hall carried a note of indulgence, a weight of arrogance, as though the very timbers of the house bent to their amusement. They did not see the shadow laboring outside their feast. They did not see his hands, scarred, cracked, and steady, moving with the precision of memory. Hands had always been his fate. His father, Caleb, once told him, "A man's hands are his true scripture, boy. They tell the truth of his living when his tongue must stay still." Caleb's own hands had been thick, scarred from tools and rope burns, yet they could shape timber as though coaxing a secret from God himself. Ezekiel had watched him turn raw wood into beams that held roofs, chairs that cradled bodies, coffins that bore them into the earth. As a child, Ezekiel had traced his father's palms in wonder. Each line was a story, each callus a lesson. Caleb had taught him to plane a board, to drive a nail straight with 3 strikes, to set a foundation square. And when Ezekiel faltered, when a door he shaped dragged its hinge and stuck, his father only said, "Stone remembers, wood remembers. Do it again until your hands remember too." But memory had not saved Caleb. Ezekiel saw it now. Even as he pressed another brick into place, his father bent beneath the whip, shoulders breaking, voice hoarse from fever. Caleb had been mending the main house door, ordered to repair it before sundown. He had moved too slowly. Silas Whitford's anger fell like storm rain. The whip bit into Caleb's back until the board shuddered with each strike. Ezekiel had been forced to watch, a boy no older than 10, holding nails in his palm while his father's blood soaked into the threshold. By nightfall, Caleb's breath rattled thin. By morning, he was gone. The door hung straight. The price had been paid. The memory burned hotter than the firelight spilling through the dining room shutters. Ezekiel's jaw clenched as he set another brick. Mortar oozed at the seams, gray as ash. He smoothed it with the trowel's edge, listening to the scrape echo like a whisper of his father's last words. Now his hands, taught to build, moved to bury. Inside, silver clinked against glass. Guests praised Silas for his plantation's yield, for the fine cut of meat served upon pewter plates, for the music of Prudence's laugh as she paraded her wealth. Ezekiel could see her through a slit between the bricks, the sweep of her silk gown glinting in candlelight. She leaned toward her guest with a queen's posture, her powdered hair gleaming like frost. He caught her eye once, just once, as he worked. For that brief instant she saw him kneeling in the corridor, his hand pressing stone upon stone. She squinted, her lips pursing, then dismissed him with a flick of her wrist as though he were a fly to be brushed aside. Invisible. Always invisible. The wall rose higher. Ezekiel shifted to the window. The shutters groaned as he closed them tight. He bricked the frame from the bottom upward, his trowel biting deep into the mortar. Behind the glass, Prudence's laughter faltered for a moment as she adjusted her shawl. She rubbed her arms as though chilled, though the hearth blazed. "Strange draft tonight," she murmured, but no one heard her. Josiah Hartwell poured another glass of wine and launched into talk of tobacco markets, his voice filling the silence she left behind. Ezekiel's arms ached, but the rhythm steadied him. Scoop, spread, press, brick after brick. His body moved as if guided by something older than him, something buried deep in his blood. The wall closed another window and another. Each frame sealed off light, sealed off air. The smell of mortar thickened, creeping inward. The guests began to cough, though they waved it off as smoke from the hearth. Silas shifted in his chair. His ruddy face gleamed with sweat, though he had drunk more than enough to account for it. "Boy," he barked toward the doorway without turning his head. "Mind the dust." His voice cracked like the lash had once cracked across Caleb's back. Ezekiel did not answer. He pressed another brick into place. Silas never looked back to see whether he obeyed. They did not see. They never saw. Not when Caleb lay dying. Not when Temperance was dragged from their quarters to be sold south. Not when Ezekiel's back split under leather. Their blindness was their inheritance, their birthright. And now it would be their grave. Ezekiel's sweat mingled with lime, stinging his skin. He paused for a breath, his chest rising slow, and in the silence he heard her voice, his mother's, soft as wind through pines. She had died before Temperance was taken, but her words lived in his marrow. Stone remembers what flesh forgets. He pressed harder. The mortar hissed between his fingers. A guest inside raised a toast. "To the Whitfords, may their wealth endure as long as these walls stand." Laughter rang like thunder. Glasses clinked. The irony pressed cold against Ezekiel's chest. These walls would indeed endure. Longer than laughter. Longer than breath. The bricks rose past his waist, past his chest. His fingers cramped, but he did not slow. The rhythm was all that remained. Scoop, spread, press. Scoop, spread, press. Each stroke of the trowel became prayer. Each brick a psalm. He was building a scripture his masters would never read but would feel written upon their lungs. The air inside grew heavy. Candles guttered, their flames bending toward the sealed windows. A child's voice piped up from the table. Mercy Whitford's niece, no older than 7. "Aunt Prudence, why does the room feel smaller?" she asked. Her words were drowned in laughter as Josiah lifted her onto his knee, dismissing her worry with a story about riverboats. But Ezekiel heard it. He pressed another brick and whispered under his breath, "Yes, child, it grows smaller." He closed the last window. The room inside now had no eyes to the night. Only walls, only fire, only voices. His breath came steady, though his chest ached. His knuckles bled where stone cut skin, but he pressed on. His hands, once raised to build homes, now laid the foundation of silence. He did not falter. He did not look upon their faces again. He only worked, and the walls crept higher. From within, the coughing grew louder. Prudence fanned herself with a folded handkerchief, her powdered face damp with sweat. Silas wiped his brow with the back of his hand, muttering about poor draftsmanship, about smoke settling wrong. Yet even as discomfort prickled, their pride held them at the table. Their feast was too rich to abandon. Their arrogance too swollen to heed the carpenter's hands moving in the shadows. Ezekiel smoothed another line of mortar. He could feel the wall rising inside his chest, closing off memory, sealing away grief. Each stone was Temperance's scream. Each seam was Caleb's blood. Each brick was a hand upon his shoulder guiding him. Stone remembers what flesh forgets. And still the wall grew. The moon had slipped high above the Kentucky hills, casting its pale light across the fields where cotton stalks whispered in the autumn breeze. Yet inside the Whitford house, that moon no longer touched the dining hall. Josiah Hartwell, a stout man with a florid face, blinked into his wine glass and frowned at the shutter nearest his chair. "Strange," he muttered, leaning slightly, trying to recall whether the night sky had been visible there before. He remembered a sliver of pale light spilling across the table when the feast began, but now there was only black wood pressed tight against the frame. His words floated across the table like a stray note out of tune. Strange indeed. No one answered him. The conversation pressed onward as though the discomfort of silence might shatter their revelry. Silas Whitford raised his cup again, voice booming with forced cheer, but Josiah could not let go of the unease. He squinted at the window, then at another across the room. Both closed. He rubbed his temple, muttered something about drafts, then drowned his suspicion with another swallow of claret. Outside in the corridor, Ezekiel Carter pressed another brick into its place. His hands moved with a rhythm that belonged less to flesh than to stone itself. The scrape of trowel across mortar, the press of brick against bed, the smoothing of seams. It was a cadence, a prayer older than words. His lips moved, though no guest could hear them, humming a tune born in the brush arbors and night meetings hidden from the master's eyes. A low hymn, deep as river mud. It had no words, only breath, but it carried the weight of 1,000 broken backs. His mother had hummed it when the lash struck Caleb. His sister Temperance had whispered it through tears when their chains clinked in the darkness of the quarters. Now Ezekiel carried it into the mortar, stone by stone, a song meant not for heaven but for judgment. Inside the hall, Prudence Whitford dabbed her forehead with her lace kerchief. A vein pulsed at her temple. The heat seemed thick, stifling. "Ezekiel," she called sharply, her voice pitched above the murmur of guests. "Leave that work until morning. You are fouling the air with dust." The trowel scraped again. Brick pressed down. Silence answered her command. Her lips thinned. She turned back to her guests, waving her hand as though swatting an insect. "The boy never listens unless struck. Silas, see him later." But Silas was drunk, his attention dulled by roasted duck and whiskey. He raised a heavy hand in vague acknowledgement, his face red and glistening, then returned to boasting about his acreage. Ezekiel did not pause. He spread mortar thick, pressed the next brick, tapped it firmly with the handle of the trowel. His hum deepened, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the timbers themselves. The guests coughed. At first it was only one, a young cousin with a thin chest. Then another, then two more, until the sound of throats clearing broke through the laughter. Dust swirled in the candlelight, carried by a current that seemed to come from nowhere. Shadows thickened. "Open a window," Josiah muttered, wiping his brow. His hand reached instinctively toward the nearest shutter, but when he pushed, it did not budge. Sealed. His frown deepened. He pressed harder, then turned back toward the table. "Locked," he said, his voice uncertain. "Or nailed shut." Prudence's face darkened. "Ezekiel," she snapped again. "Cease this nonsense at once." Still the scrape of the trowel. Still the hum. The guests exchanged glances, unease creeping into their mirth. A woman shivered, clutching her shawl. The child, Mercy's niece, asked in a small voice why the moon had gone. The fire in the great hearth flickered, then flared, then sank as though starved. The logs spat sparks but gave little light. Shadows crowded the corners of the room, swelling with each brick Ezekiel laid. Silas pushed himself halfway up from his chair, his belly heavy against the table. "Boy," he bellowed toward the closed door. "Do you hear your mistress?" "Stop your work." The only reply was another brick pressed into place. The sound of mortar smoothed, the hymn low and steady, crawling beneath the laughter like a snake in dry grass. Silas cursed and sat back down. His guests tittered nervously, then tried to carry on. But conversation no longer flowed as easily. Their words stumbled, their laughter faltered, their eyes darted toward the sealed windows. The air grew heavier. A sweetness from Prudence's pies soured against the lime bite of mortar drifting in. The contrast made throats tighten. A faint dust film clung to their pewter cups. One woman set her fork down, hands trembling. "It feels close here," she whispered. No one disagreed. At the table's head, Silas Whitford lifted his glass again, forcing his voice into a roar. "Nonsense. Drink, friends, drink. The boy will answer for his insolence, but tonight is for celebration." His words boomed, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else, something colder than rage. For the first time, Silas wondered at Ezekiel's silence. The wall climbed higher, stone by stone. The windows disappeared one after another, replaced by blank walls. The doorframes narrowed. Each brick muffled the sound of the world outside, drawing the dining hall deeper into its own belly. The guests shifted in their chairs, their smiles wan. The laughter had gone, replaced by the shuffle of nervous feet beneath the table. A cough echoed, followed by another. The fire hissed and bent low. The room felt smaller, though nothing had moved. The table stood where it had been, the chairs no nearer, yet each guest felt pressed against the other. Shoulders brushed that had not touched before. Elbows crowded. Ezekiel's hum deepened. The words were lost to the night, but their weight pressed against the walls like a second layer of mortar. Stone remembers. Flesh forgets. Inside, Prudence smoothed her gown with trembling fingers. She looked again at the shuttered windows, her eyes narrowing. "It is peculiar," she said softly, though no one answered. For the first time, her voice did not command. It quavered. The silence that followed was worse than noise. It was not the silence of peace, but of something gathering in the shadows, something coiled. Ezekiel's trowel scraped again. Another brick fell into place, the feast soured into silence. Where once there had been laughter and the clatter of silver, now there was only the crackle of the fire and the coughs of uneasy throats. The guests stared at the sealed windows, their wine-slick cheer bleeding away into suspicion. The walls seemed to breathe around them, pressing inward though they did not move. At the head of the table, Silas Whitford shoved his chair back so violently the legs screeched against the plank floor. His ruddy face flushed deeper, a vein bulging at his temple. "Enough of this nonsense," he thundered. The weight of his voice meant to shatter fear as it always had. He lumbered toward the doorway, heavy hands clenched into fists. "Boy!" The word cracked like a whip through the hall. In the corridor, Ezekiel Carter did not lift his head. He drew the trowel across mortar, laid it thick, and pressed another brick into place. The scrape of iron and the wet slap of lime answered Silas's command more surely than words. His silence was heavier than rage. "Do you hear me?" Silas bellowed. Spittle gleamed in the firelight at the corners of his mouth. "Stop this at once. You'll hang for it, you damned mule." The trowel scraped again. Brick, mortar, brick. Silas lunged for the door, but when he pulled the handle, it groaned without giving way. He wrenched harder, red-faced, but the frame held tight. Braced, sealed. A murmur rippled around the table. Josiah Hartwell rose, knocking his chair over in his haste, and hurried to another door across the hall. He rattled the latch, slammed his shoulder against the wood. Nothing. Sealed. He turned, chest heaving, sweat streaking his brow despite the chill crawling through the room. "The doors," he stammered. "The doors won't open." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then panic clawed its way up their throats. "Impossible," Prudence hissed, her lace kerchief crushed in her hand. She stumbled toward the window, clawed at the shutter, but her fingers found only cool stone where glass had been. She screamed. The hall erupted. Guests rushed to the walls, pounding fists against fresh mortar, clawing nails against bricks that already cut skin. The rhythm of blows echoed like drums of war. Yet for every strike, the sound was muffled, absorbed by stone, answered only by the scrape of Ezekiel's trowel as he pressed the wall higher. The truth settled heavy and undeniable. They were being bricked alive. Voices shifted with the weight of realization. Authority first, sharp and commanding. "Open this door, Ezekiel." Josiah barked. "This is madness, madness." Then bargaining. "Stop now and Silas will forgive you, boy. He will show mercy. You'll be spared the noose." Then mockery, desperate laughter cracking through fear. "You haven't the strength," one man jeered, though his voice trembled. "You'll tire before long." But the wall climbed. The air thickened, the laughter died, terror came last. Mercy Whitford, a cousin draped in pearls, clutched at her throat and sobbed, her face blotched red. "I cannot breathe," she gasped. Her nails tore at the stone, leaving streaks of blood smeared in candlelight. She crumpled against the wall, her sobs echoing higher than the prayers whispered around her. The fire hissed, choking on its own smoke. The roasted duck and sugared pies, once fragrant, turned sickening in the heavy air. Sweetness clashed with lime, a nauseating perfume of feast and funeral intermingled. Ezekiel did not falter. His heartbeat steadied as the room's chaos swelled. He laid brick after brick with the patience of eternity. Brick, mortar, brick. His hands moved as though guided by the memory of every lash, every scream, every grave dug too shallow. Inside, Royce's fractured into pleas. Prudence shrieked promises of freedom, her shrill voice cracking on the word manumission. "You'll be free, Ezekiel. You'll have papers. You'll walk this county a free man." She clawed at the wall with bloodied fingers. But Ezekiel remembered her laughter the day temperance was sold. How her jeweled hand had signed the ledger with a flourish as though sealing away a child's future was nothing more than arithmetic. He pressed another brick into place. Josiah's voice turned hoarse, desperate. "Gold, Ezekiel. You can have gold, enough to buy land, enough to—" His words broke into coughing fits, his chest rattling as lime and dust filled the hall. The guests clawed harder. Their fists left smears of blood across the bricks, scarlet staining gray. The sound of nails tearing against mortar filled the air, a feral percussion. Still Ezekiel worked. His hum deepened, the hymn steady as heartbeat. The rhythm drowned their voices in his ears. Brick, mortar, brick. The walls glistened with sweat and blood. Candles sputtered, flames bowing low, shadows twisting like black smoke across the table. Guests' faces twisted into masks, eyes wild, mouths gaping, their fine clothes streaked with dust and crimson. Prudence collapsed against her husband's chest, sobbing. "Silas, do something!" she wailed. But Silas, red and furious, pounded his fists against the sealed door until the skin split across his knuckles. His curses cracked into groans. For the first time, fear crept into his booming voice. The walls listened. The stone remembered. Ezekiel pressed another brick into mortar, smoothed it, tapped it firm. His breath slowed. His body, scarred and weary, felt lighter with each stone. His silence was his verdict. Behind the wall, the world shrank. The guests' shouts blurred into muffled thunder, their fists into dull thuds, their sobs into whispers. The hall was becoming a tomb, and Ezekiel its mason priest. He closed his eyes a moment, heard his mother's voice in the silence. Stone remembers what flesh forgets. The scrape of the trowel answered her. Brick. Mortar. Brick. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if these macabre tales fascinate you. Comment your thoughts. How far is too far for revenge? The dining hall had once been a theater of wealth, a place for roasted meats and polished silver, for laughter that smothered silence. Now it was an asylum of panic. Voices rose not in merriment but in terror, colliding against the walls as if the noise itself might break stone. Josiah Hartwell was the first to fall to his knees. His ruddy face blanched as he fumbled with his purse heavy with coin. He held it high, shaking, the clink of gold ringing like a desperate bell. "Ezekiel, gold! All of it, yours!" he cried, his voice cracking under the weight of dust in his throat. "Take it and go! Take it, I beg you, end this madness." From the corridor came only the scrape of trowel, the press of stone, the steady hum of a hymn. The purse slipped from Josiah's trembling hands, scattering coins across the floor. Guests dove for them, not in greed, but as if the sight of glittering metal might summon salvation. Fingers scrambled across the boards, clawing at the coins like starving animals. Yet no amount of gold could loosen a single brick. Prudence Whitford's voice shredded itself against her throat. She screamed promises of manumission, words spat like prayers. "Papers, Ezekiel. You'll be free, truly free. You'll walk this county as a man, not a slave. Do you hear me? You'll have your freedom." But her voice wavered on the word freedom. She did not know its weight, not truly. For her it was a coin to barter, a trinket to toss. Ezekiel heard her words and remembered temperance, remembered her fingernails clawing splinters from the wooden floor as she was dragged away. He remembered her scream tearing itself raw against the night, swallowed by the clatter of wagon wheels. He spread mortar, pressed another brick. Silas Whitford roared curses until his voice broke into ragged sobs. His fists, once heavy with power, beat against the sealed door until his knuckles split, blood streaking the wood. He staggered back, his chest heaving like a beast struck through the heart. He cursed Ezekiel's name, cursed God, cursed his guests for their weakness, cursed the very house he had built on the backs of slaves. His voice cracked thin and pitiful, swallowed by the weight of the walls. The air grew thick. It pressed against lungs, stole breath, left throats raw. Flames guttered low, tongues of fire licking weakly at half-burnt logs. Smoke curled upward and hung in the ceiling's beams, trapped, spreading in a dim haze that stung eyes and clawed lungs. The rich perfume of roasted duck soured, mingling with the lime tang of mortar, forming a stench that turned stomachs. Guests seized whatever lay near, forks, knives, goblets, and smashed them against stone. The shriek of metal against brick was grotesque, the scrape of porcelain shattering shriller still. Plates shattered across the floor, jagged edges grasped as makeshift weapons against an enemy that could not bleed. Their blows left scratches on stone, faint and futile, the only answer to the rising wall. A child, Mercy's niece, swayed in her chair. Her lips parted soundlessly, her eyelids fluttered, and she collapsed against the table. Her small body slid to the floor. Panic surged anew. Women screamed, men shouted, hands pressed frantically to her chest, to her lips, but no breath came. The child was swallowed by the air before death had even fully arrived. Her mother's wail pierced the hall like glass breaking. sharper than any brick. Ezekiel's hands trembled, but they did not falter. He pressed another brick, his palms raw, his fingers bloodied from sharp edges. The wall rose higher, closing the last mouths of air, sealing the last glimmers of candlelight. His breath rasped, salt burning his tongue, ash thick on his lips. Still he hummed, the hymn low and steady. The screams grew ragged. Desperation replaced fury. Some guests collapsed against the walls, smearing blood as their fingernails tore away. Others choked on smoke, coughing until their throats rattled wet. Prudence shrieked her promises until her voice broke, until she could muster nothing but a rasp of breath. The hall was no longer a place of feasting. It was a tomb masquerading as a dining room. The silver gleamed like funeral trinkets, the roasted duck like carrion, the pies like offerings left to rot. Shadows swelled, smoke thickened, and every sound muffled as though the world itself were pressing its palm against the hall, silencing it. Ezekiel remembered Temperance's cries as vividly as if they lived in the mortar itself. He saw her face, the whites of her eyes wide with terror, her nails splitting as she clawed the floor. He had tried to hold her hand, but they had torn her away, dragged her out into the night, her scream slicing the sky. That scream had never left him. Tonight it wove through the voices behind the wall, mingling with the wails, the sobs, the curses. He laid the final bricks with trembling hands. Each stone sealed another voice, another cry, another desperate bargain. His palms bled. His knuckles split. Still he pressed on, unrelenting, until the last space was filled. The wall stood complete. The voices dwindled to muffled gasps, then to choked silence. Fists pounded weakly, then faded. The scrape of porcelain ceased. The last sobs broke into silence. Ezekiel set the trowel down. His arms fell limp at his sides. Sweat burned his eyes, salt and ash thick upon his tongue. He swayed, but he did not weep. His chest rose and fell, slow and steady. His heartbeat matched the rhythm of the bricks. The wall loomed before him, gray and implacable, its surface smooth beneath his raw hands. Behind it, silence pressed outward, heavy and absolute. The dining hall was no more. It was a crypt carved not into earth but into wood and stone. A banquet table turned beer. Laughter turned lament. The work was finished. Ezekiel did not bow his head, nor did he pray. He simply stood, his breath ragged, his eyes fixed on the tomb he had built. The wall remembered what flesh had tried to forget, and the house groaned with the weight of its memory. The silence after the screams was heavier than the screams themselves. It spread through the Whitford plantation like a fog, seeping into every timber and stone, into the very earth beneath the cotton fields. Where laughter had once rolled out of the dining hall windows, there was now only stillness. No pounding fists, no muffled voices, no desperate bargains. Only the house itself seemed to groan, as if the timbers strained under the weight of what had been swallowed alive. Ezekiel Carter sat on the cool earth just beyond the sealed doorway, his back against the wall he had raised. His chest rose and fell slowly, though his breath rasped. His hands lay open upon his knees, palms raw, skin split across knuckles and fingers, blood crusted in fine lines, dark as the mortar pressed into his skin. He studied them without thought, only seeing hands that had built smokehouses, barns, coffins, hands that had been beaten into calluses, hands that had clung once to Temperance's as she was torn away. Now those hands had finished their last work upon this soil. He did not feel triumph, nor regret, only stillness. Outside, the Kentucky night sang as it always had. Crickets shrilled in the grass. An owl gave a lonely call from the trees. From far away, faint and ghostly, came the rush of the Ohio River, its waters carrying trade and chains alike. The world continued, indifferent to what had been sealed behind stone. Yet within the house something lingered. Ezekiel tilted his head. In the silence he thought he heard faint scratches, thin as insect legs, brushing along the timbers. Perhaps it was wood settling. Perhaps not. He thought he heard the sigh of breath pressed against walls that would not yield, a memory, an echo, or something more. The sound threaded itself through the silence until it seemed the house itself was remembering. Stone remembers what flesh forgets. The words circled in his skull, his mother's voice carrying them still. He wondered whether she had known, whether she had whispered to them to prepare him for this. For a night when the only scripture would be a wall, the only hymn was the scrape of a trowel. His eyes lifted to the windows, now dark. Once moonlight had spilled in. Now only stone stared back, blind and unyielding. The dining hall had no eyes left to the world. Its laughter was swallowed. Its wealth was buried in its own splendor. Its guests had become part of its foundation. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of damp earth and river reeds. It washed the lime dust from Ezekiel's throat, but not the taste of ash that clung to his tongue. He spat into the dirt, a thin streak of blood following. His body ached, but no part of him longed for rest. He was emptied, hollowed by what had been done. The stillness grew. He thought of his father, Caleb, dying beneath the whip while repairing the main house door. He thought of Temperance, dragged away by traitors while Prudence's jeweled hand signed the ledger. He thought of his mother's hymn, hummed while patching his wounds. All of them were gone. Their absence had hollowed him brick by brick until tonight. Now in that hollow there was only the wall. He rose slowly, his legs stiff, his back a knot of pain. He turned once to look at the sealed dining hall. The house loomed in the dark, shutters closed, its timbers groaning softly as if alive. He felt the weight of what lay within pressing outward, though the stones held fast. He laid his palm against the wall. It was cool, smooth, and unyielding. It would hold, others would find it, of course. Servants would rise at dawn, would come with trays and pitchers, would wonder at the silence. They would see the sealed doors, the bricked windows, the dining hall transformed into a tomb. They would whisper, shout, call for help. The county would stir. The law would come, and what then? Ezekiel did not know. He did not plan to be there to see. The noose was ready for him regardless, whether for the act of rebellion or the mere fact of his living. His sentence had been written long before this night, so he turned from the house, his shadow stretching long across the dirt. The road uncoiled before him, leading into fog that crept from the river bottoms. The mist swallowed the fields, the fences, the cabins. It rolled low, thick and pale, as though the earth itself wished to hide what had been done here. Ezekiel stepped into it. Each step carried him farther from the wall, yet he felt its weight within him. He carried it in his blood, in his marrow, in the cracks of his hands. Whether he lived one more day or many, he would carry it still. The wall was not only behind him. It was within him. The fog thickened. His figure vanished into it, his hymn silent now. Only the crickets called, only the river breathed. The house behind him stood still upon its foundations, a sealed wound upon the land. Within, silence pressed outward. The air is heavy with memory. No one would call it justice. No one would call it mercy. It was something else entirely. A crime. A reckoning. A hymn laid in stone. And long after Ezekiel's steps faded into the mist, the wall remained, heavy, cold, remembering. Was it vengeance, righteous and due? Or was it monstrous, born of suffering turned inward until it devoured everything? The question lingered unanswered in the Kentucky night. The house gave no answer. It only held its silence, stone remembers. Always. If this story haunted you, subscribe for more macabre horror from history's darkest corners. Tell me in the comments, what forgotten horror should I uncover next?